Sure, the Green Bay Packers were disappointing on Sunday against the Denver Broncos, but what exactly were they trying to do? That matters.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet. And the show for fans who know what happened, they want to know why and how. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. By the way, YouTube TV is just the best platform for your streaming TV anyway. Not even an ad, just a thing that is true. I use YouTube TV. I went back and watched Packers Broncos, so you didn't have to. And what struck me was the difference between what the Broncos seemed to be trying to do and what the Packers seemed to be trying to do. And what I didn't understand then and still don't understand now is the answer for the Packers. The Broncos were trying to look good. They were trying to play well, and they need to because they played their starters. They're trying to break in a new quarterback. They're trying to imbue this new quarterback, this rookie quarterback, with some confidence. And so they're running like staple Sean Payton, legit. We used to run these on 4th down with Drew Brees and the Saints plays in the low red zone. Okay, so it's just from that standpoint fundamentally different. There was a stretch at one point when the game was still in the balance where the Packers went run, pass. They did not convert on that 3rd down. They punted, but got a penalty, so they got the ball right back and went run, pass, and then on 3rd and 5, ran the ball to their 5th string running back. What was the goal? And you go back to joint practices, and Matt LaFleur will tell you part of what they wanted to be working on was run blocking. One of the Packers' bugaboos last year, and even if you go back into 2022 and 2021, even with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon and David Bakhtiari, was they could not punish teams for playing light boxes. And so I understand, to a point, Matt LaFleur wanting to say, we need to work on this thing. That is more important than winning or losing. By the way, working on certain things in the preseason is more important than winning or losing. But what I think ended up happening to the point that they couldn't get a quality evaluation on these guys is they prioritized that to a fault. Because we didn't get to see Michael Pratt or Sean Clifford in advantageous situations at all. And it's not that you want to only evaluate a quarterback in advantageous situations, but you don't want to only evaluate a quarterback in disadvantageous situations, which is essentially the only plays that the quarterbacks got on Sunday night. Nothing really that easy, nothing schemed up really for them. They ran the 1 RPO and Denver, the Denver announcing crew acted like the Packers pulled out a double flea flicker reverse pass secret special. And that, that's neither here nor there, but the Packers didn't really do anything that unique. They played impossibly vanilla on defense, not just offense, defense. And it was such a stark contrast to what we saw in the Browns game. And I do think it impacted the players and their mentality. And I understand wanting to say we don't want to tip our hands. There is an ocean. You could fill Lake Michigan with the middle ground between showing things to opponents that are meaningful for a game in the regular season, and what the Packers did on Sunday night. Now, Matt LaFleur deserves the benefit of the doubt on these things. Generally, he's a great coach. I did not like the way this was handled, but if the biggest goal was to go in and say, we want to work and rep our run blocks, and we want to see our backup offensive linemen in particular in these circumstances. I thought Sean Ryan and Jacob Monk acquitted themselves quite nicely. In fact, the Packers' interior offensive line is quite good in terms of depth. Andre Dillard at left tackle played solid. We're going to talk about some of the players who I thought played well in this game. I felt like I didn't spend enough time talking about that after the game because I didn't really get a chance to, because it was such an ugly excuse for a football game. But I just didn't think the Packers went into this whole week with the right mentality. They did not show up to compete. They did not meet the level of intensity and focus that the Broncos had. And yes, okay, the Broncos played their starters, and it meant more to them because they're probably not going to be a playoff team, and the Packers are, and so it doesn't matter as much. And really the goal is to get to these practices without getting hurt. But that's not true for the backups for the Packers. And if you're the coaches, you want to put those guys in positions to succeed, to show you what they can do. It's not really that useful to see Raylan Goforth in a disadvantageous set of situations. I understand if he's going to, have to play, if there's injuries, that's what he'll be in. But it's also just not what you do if you're Jeff Hafley. You're not going to be like, okay, well, he's out there, let's make it as tough on him as possible. That's just not what you're going to do. And then you have 11 guys who are backups and you'd like to put in more advantageous situations. And it seemed like they missed an opportunity to evaluate these guys. Like, what did you ultimately learn here? What was the goal? And again, we need to know the goal before we can say definitively that this was a useless exercise. But given the way Matt LaFleur talked after the game, it seemed like they kind of came in and did what they wanted to do from a coaching perspective. It was the players that didn't execute. They were botching day one install stuff. And I get that. But then also when you're calling every pass play is just like all slants, I'm going, what are they supposed to do? Okay, win one-on-one, but you're giving nothing pre-snap, no pre-snap motion, and you're asking these backup guys to go just win one-on-one? I guess to a certain degree, that's part of the preseason. That's part of the point. But you're not helping anybody. And that's not how you'd call the game in the regular season. So what is the value? And if what you really wanted was to see them one-on-one against backup versus backup, then you should have just had one-on-ones in the joint practice and call the game like you would call a game or something close to it. I didn't understand it. I still don't understand it. I've watched it again. And it's just so obvious. It's just so obvious. Now, Sean Payton is not going to be calling meaningful football games this year in all likelihood. And so, yeah, he wants to pump up this team, give them confidence. He wants them to look good. He wants them to feel like they're good. They go into the regular season and maybe they upset some teams. Maybe they play over their heads because they've been injected with this confidence that they got through the preseason where they're playing their starters and they're like, hey, we can do this. The flip side of this is they show up in the regular season and they're in for a rude awakening when teams actually try and play, when they aren't sitting 30 starters, 30 players. I don't think you can have 30 starters if I do the math right, but 30 players, and the Broncos are playing like Nick Benito into the third quarter. What are we doing? I don't see how that's useful if you're the Broncos other than in this mind games kind of way. So, with that in mind, Tyron Hopper was one of those players who on rewatch stood out to me in a way that I didn't think he would, in a good way. I want to be positive, talk about the players who I thought excelled on Sunday and who maybe need some more opportunities. We'll do that next on Locked On Packers. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, so a little over a month, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. I have it. It is a great product, especially if you are out of market. Then you have, with a YouTube base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment. You can cancel anytime. And YouTube TV is my TV watching platform of choice. That was true for 5 years, longer, maybe. I'd have to do the math. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to download America's #1 sportsbook. Thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen. For your second listen, check out Locked On Fantasy Football. Get daily insights to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league. Then, of course, during the season, you're talking about waiver wires, trade opportunities, buy low, sell high candidates, all that. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to be positive, and so I want to talk about Brenton Cox. Brenton Cox, according to Pro Football Focus, had 5 pressures in 17 pass rush reps on Sunday with a sack. And it's one of those that shows up, not some token pressure where he doesn't affect the play. No, he consistently affected the passer. And right now, by Pro Football Focus charting, he leads players who have only played the 2 preseason games, so not the Bears and the Texans who played the extra game, tied for the lead in the preseason with pressures. This is a defense that suits him and maybe even suits him in a way that it might not. Someone like Kingsley Enagbare, someone who's just like pin your ears back and go disrupt the pocket. He's shown more nuance than we saw last year, than we saw at Florida. The sack was on a play where he's initially blocked. It's not, and these are things that are critical to me when I evaluate a pass rusher, when I'm trying to watch the development of the pass rusher. How many of the wins come on a secondary move? So you try something, you're stymied, then what do? The sack was on a play where he engages with the blocker, does not win off the jump, does not win with, burst around the corner or anything like that. But then after the engagement, no diamond involved, it is a chop move, get his hands off, bend to the quarterback, flatten to the quarterback, make the sack, finish. It's a nice play. Someone like Aaron Mosby, who was another player who impressed me in this game, he won quickly, forced that interception. Beautiful cross chop, double hands, bang, get the hands off, flatten to the QB, force the ball to come out. The Packers have some pass rushers. I did not think Lucas Van Ness played particularly well in this game after a pretty solid outing in the first game. That's not what we're talking about. Tyron Hopper did. And there were some times in space, in coverage, where he was a step slow, 2 steps slow even, and didn't quite look like he knew what he was looking at. And then there were times, man, when the instincts took over and you saw a player who, when he sees it, he is going to hit it. He is a heat-seeking missile. A couple times. Running back downhill, he reads it, he comes downhill, bang. It is a collision. You are going to feel Tyron Hopper. A terrific 2-play sequence early in the game because Javon Bullard is still out there. They throw a little swing pass to the running back. Javon Bullard takes on the running back force with the tight end block with force. Does not let him go wherever he wants. Tyron Hopper chases him down to the sideline and finishes. On the very next play, interior offensive lineman climbs to the second level to Tyron Hopper. He dips underneath. Really good flexibility. The lineman grabs him. No call. Should have been a hold. Grabs him. He slides around Matrix style and makes the tackle as he's being grabbed and held by this offensive lineman. It is a really, really nice 2-play sequence. There is something there with Tyron Hopper in a way that I was not sure coming in. And we had Joey Van Zumeren on the show, covered him at the University of Missouri, and was just sort of like, yeah. That was basically the response. Yeah, he's a nice player. Up and down, inconsistent. That's what he was in college. But if you're projecting, you have to do more than just what were you asked to do in college? What were you able to do in college? No, what can you do for the Packers? What can Brown do for you? What can Tyron Hopper do for the Packers? And I think he has a chance to be that other outside linebacker. Quay Walker, Edgerrin Cooper, I think eventually is going to be your two. We're going to talk about Edgerrin Cooper to end the show. And Hopper as a run and chase linebacker, I really like that for him as a role. Led the team in tackles. Now he played nearly the whole game. But you need to see him. He needed these reps. We talked about the rookies and being behind because they didn't have the reps. Well, Tyron Hopper got the reps and made the most of them. Really great tape for learning purposes. Some really good stuff. Reading and reacting, fire his guns, and coming downhill. Is there some stuff he can work on in coverage? Yes, but he's a rookie. We didn't expect it to be ready to go. In fact, in a lot of ways, he looked, at least in this game, more ready to go than I thought he would. I mentioned Jacob Monk and Sean Ryan. They look like quality swing interior players, guys who, if they needed to start, could. And it wasn't just Jacob Monk starting at center. We thought it was center. He was going to come in, but he played guard and played guard pretty well, I thought. In fact, the plays where he and Ryan had combo blocks, they were excellent. I thought in limited play, Javon Bullard looked really good early on. We'll have to spend another time talking about Javon Bullard in the slot. To open this game, Bullard was the safety with Evan Williams, and then in the nickel, he rolled down into the nickel and they played three safeties. That was their nickel coverage early on. Now they were short a bunch of corners. Carrington Valentine hurt. Stokes, Nixon, and Jair didn't play, but they had Kalen King. It could have been Kalen King, and eventually it was Kalen King, who did not play well in this game at all. They went three safeties instead, and even when Bullard came out of the game, they used Anthony Johnson Jr. in that spot, which I thought was interesting. Just something to keep an eye on, something that I have been advocating for on this show, as you know. Malik Heath, another guy, the only receiver really that showed up in this game in an offense where you had Bo Melton, Grant Dubose, and Malik Heath, guys who I think are three legit NFL receivers where your quarterbacks did not play well. The only guy who showed up, Malik Heath, someone who I just cannot quit. And I don't want to keep off of this roster because I think the world of him as a role player on this Packers team. I just thought Grant Dubose had played well enough that he was going to take his job. And then a couple end of the roster guys that I really liked. Nate McCrary, very limited snaps at the end of the game, but someone who looks like he's got a little juice, got a little size, played with good pad level. I liked what I saw from him. And Christian Welch, I know he made the interception, so it's easy to say, okay, like he played well, but there was one play where he ran the alley down to the sideline, sifted through the trash, and makes a really nice play on the sidelines. I thought he played up and down a little bit against the Browns. Brian Gutekunst said, we may have to keep an extra linebacker just because of the injury situations that the Packers currently find themselves in. They're fighting for that extra one. I think Christian Welch could be that guy, but we'll see. Speaking of linebackers, are we getting to the point where Edgerrin Cooper may just have to go on IR to start this season? Well, the new IR rules might make it easier to do that. We'll talk about it next on Locked On Packers. Thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen. Now go listen to Locked On Fantasy Football. Get daily insights to the best fantasy draft strategies, waiver wires, trades, all that kind of good stuff. You can find the link to Locked On Fantasy Football in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I've told you that I'm worried about these rookies. Marshawn Lloyd couldn't play in this game. He's falling behind. Jordan Morgan back and getting work in. Edgerrin Cooper is approaching a dangerous level of washed rookie season. And we're not there yet. But given that he has not practiced in pads, basically, with his team, he was expected to come in and compete for a starting job and has not been able to even practice. When the season opens, the IR rules have changed, and now you can put a player on IR without putting him on the final 53 and without putting him on season-ending IR. It used to be the case that if you're going to go on injured reserve during cutdowns, you were on injured reserve for the year. That's not the case anymore, but you have limited spots. I believe you can only do it with 2 guys, and they still have to sit for 4 weeks on injured reserve. They have to do the full injured reserve term, essentially. And Marshawn Lloyd is the kind of player who, because of the position, you can just put together a package of plays for Marshawn Lloyd. He can come in and just be a jet motion guy, or just be a, hey, we're only going to run, inside zone from the gun, and then the couple plays we have off it, play action and those kinds of things. We have a package of plays for you this week, Marshawn. Those kinds of things where you're going to play 8-10 snaps, and no training camp is not a big deterrent for someone like that. But when we're talking about the nickel linebacker, where are you going to play Edgerrin Cooper to ease him in? You're not going to play him in base personnel. He was already not really practicing there because they were doing this weird thing where Eric Wilson was the base linebacker with Isaiah McDuffie and Quay Walker. And then in the nickel, you had Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper together. And it was just sort of like, what exactly are we doing here? What's the idea? What's the plan? Why is that happening? Unclear is the answer on that one. But you can't just put a package of plays together for Edgerrin Cooper. I suppose if you wanted to on a 4th down or a third and long and something like that, and you could throw him out there and just send him on a blitz, those kinds of things. But then it becomes way too obvious what you're going to do with him. And so we're to the point now that if Cooper does not practice this week, all of a sudden it seems like fait accompli that he's just going to go on IR. You need the roster spot. He isn't ready to go, even if, let's say he doesn't practice this week, right? Then you're 2 weeks away from the start of the season. In what universe is he ready to go and play meaningful snaps for? And he's not playing special teams. So is he ready to go? He's not going to be ready to go week 1. So it makes sense to not use a roster spot on a player who is not going to contribute to your team in any meaningful way. That's why it's essential that he plays and practices this week. Doesn't have to play in the game, but just practice. We're talking about practice. And then maybe you can use him sparingly in some nickel situations. Maybe you play him in some base situations, which is, again, weird that they decided he's not going to be a base line. I don't understand that at all. But so he seems like the guy, if the Packers are going to use this new tool, that he would be the guy that you would use it on. Now you have to sit for 4 weeks, and you lose the benefit of the practices. So the other side of this is he's a player who you believe, once he has some time under his belt, can be your starting nickel linebacker. Let's say that's true. Then perhaps, and I think, I would certainly make this case, but that's partly because I'm very underwhelmed by their current linebackers, that if he can contribute by week 2, week 3, even week 4, it's worth keeping him on the roster, keeping him off IR so that he can practice with the team, that he can go through the game plans, that he can be active on game day, that he can maybe play sparingly on special teams. If he has to go on IR, now he's not even back till you go 4 weeks in. And then when is he ready? Week 6, week 7, week 8? When he's had a ramp up period and some practices, and then you're really behind the 8 ball with this guy. That is not the optimal position. for the Packers to be in at linebacker, a position that they tried to address in meaningful ways this offseason. And for the moment, we don't see that meaningful progress. The Packers are in a very difficult spot with this right now. It's really tough. I think it's going to come down to, do they feel like they need that roster spot somewhere else? Now, last week we went through this. I did not feel like they were holding any spots hostage for players who did not belong on the team by keeping Edgerrin Cooper on the 53-man roster. It didn't even occur to me when I did that process to put him on IR. And I was able to get everyone that I thought really deserved to be on the team, with the exception of Malik Heath. So could you sneak Malik Heath on, put him on IR? Yes, you could. But now you're essentially saying half his rookie season is now down the drain for a guy who needs the practice. That's why this is complicated. There isn't just some simple answer here. And maybe he goes out there tomorrow or Wednesday or whenever this week and is practicing and looks great and he's with the first team nickel and you're like, okay, no harm, no foul. He's rested. He's ready to go. And by week 1, now you got 2 weeks to prep him. By week 1, he's ready for this Eagles team. And here we go. I don't know that that's the most likely outcome right now. To me, it's not. I need to see him on the field before I can go, okay, yeah, it's fine. I think the most likely middle ground scenario is he returns to practice at some point in the next 2 weeks. And the Packers say, look, he has to be on this team because when he's ready, he needs the reps, he needs the practice, he needs the game planning. He needs to play sparingly if necessary, get a rotation going. The Packers have never been afraid to rotate guys by series, by play. And he needs the opportunities to go out there. I think that's where the Packers are with him. Best case scenario, he's out there tomorrow, ready to go. And by week 1, he's set. I don't know that that's likely. I don't even know that if he's out there right away, he's going to be set for week 1. And that's why this gets complicated. There are not easy answers with this. But unfortunately, this is where we are with this injury, which we don't really even have that much information on right now. So we'll just have to wait. And I wrote this on Friday over at The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to, that at least for the moment, the Packers are kind of back at square one with this linebacker position. That they go into the offseason, they use, day 2 picks, Tyron Hopper and Edgerrin Cooper, and they've revamped it and they've thrown draft picks at it. That's what Brian Gutekunst does. It worked with the safeties. It hasn't worked so far. We'll see if there's another shoe to drop, if there's another lever to pull for the Packers. Pick another metaphor that you like. We'll see. I think this is what they're going to ride with, and they're just going to hope it works out. That seems to be their mantra right now. That's their mantra with the quarterback 2s. That's their mantra with the kickers. We'll see. Back tomorrow, much more here as we get ready for the final preseason game. The Ravens and the Packers will square off later this week. So follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts. And then, of course, we're on social media wherever you find social media. Instagram, TikTok. YouTube's not really social media, but we're certainly there on YouTube, so you can stay Locked On Packers.